Hello there. In this video, I'm going to be taking you through the 5 things I wish I'd known when I started out in business. Also known as the 5 mistakes I made as a startup entrepreneur that I'm desperate for you guys to avoid. Before we get into the detail, if you've not come across them before, I'd like you to do me a quick favour, and that's subscribe to my channel. And I do post new content every week, and I would love to be able to share it with you. Okay, right, well, before we get into that, let me just introduce myself. If you've not met me before, my name's Paul. I'm an accountant, I'm a CFO, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've got over 25 years experience in helping businesses to grow profitably. And not only that, I've also run 3 businesses of my own. So believe me when I say I know what it's like to be an entrepreneur and how challenging that can be. But I'm going to draw on some of that experience in my key takeaways here, the 5 things I've known before I started out. Okay, right, well, let's dive straight in. Okay, 5 things I'm going to talk through today. Number 1, the first thing I wish I'd known is that working harder is often not the answer. Now, what I'm not saying here is don't work hard, because we all know that running our own businesses, you kind of have to go to the territory. But what I mean is work smarter rather than harder. What I mean is focus on the things that make a difference. Let me give you an example. Now, the first business I ran, which was quite a few years ago, was I had a shop, had a retail business down on the south coast of the UK in a town called Brighton, in an area called the Lanes, which is a really nice tourist area in Brighton. It's really narrow, kind of cobbled streets, beautiful little shops. It's always busy. It's a really, really charming place. If you ever get the chance to go, it's well worth a visit. Anyway, I opened a shop there which was selling home accessories, china, glass, barware, all of that good stuff. And because I'm a planner, before I opened the business, I did a ton of research. You know, I researched the products, the price point, the locations. You know, I did some focus groups. You know, I just did so much before we opened the store, and we opened it, and it was a flop. What can I say? Well, it was a flop initially. I'll correct that. Why was it a flop? Because actually, despite all my research, we'd chosen a dud location. We'd chosen somewhere which was very busy, and actually with my kind of target demographic because of who the customer was. But the one thing that I'd failed to realise is that those people, although they were my target demographic, they were all visitors to the city. They weren't looking to buy stuff for the home. They didn't want to glug bags of stuff around with them all day. They were down for a day out. And so what that meant is it was very, very difficult to grow a business like that. But I did what I always do, or I had done up to that point, which was I was struggling, so I worked harder and harder, put longer hours in the shop, less time at home, less time with my family, trying everything I could to try and make a go of it. I was hell bent on it, and I was working so hard, I couldn't see the wood for the trees. It took many months for me to finally realise, take a step back and realise actually working harder in this store, in a location which is never going to be right for me, for my business, is pointless. And so it was only when I did that we then took a bold decision to close the store and move the business online that things turned around for me. But it took me a long time to reach that point, and it largely because I was new to business. You know, my previous experience of succeeding in life have been kind of academically. I don't think it's it's probably fair to say that academically wise, intellectually, I'm kind of average or a sniff above average. But I've always worked really hard, and actually through hard work, I've always done really, really well. But it's the hard work that's got me there, not necessarily the brains under the bonnet. And that was the same for, and that kind of works, academically, and it kind of works in my first few roles as an employee. But it was only when I started my own business that I realised actually, I'm not saying you shouldn't be working hardly, but actually the point of working more smartly with the right focus is what it's all about. Just putting in more hours just with a scattergun approach, trying this, that and the other, rarely works. So that's the first thing I wish I'd known before I started out, wanted to share with you today. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. So the second thing I wish I'd known is that you have to take your medicine early. Now, this is a phrase that, comes from Mary Poppins. We probably heard it from our parents when we were kids. If your parents are anything like mine, my mum was always like sticking like a spoon of, cough medicine in my mouth, and I barely kind of, uttered a cough because she was desperate for me not to get ill. And I hadn't realised it growing up, but actually that approach to taking your medicine early is equally applicable, if not more applicable, in business. So what do I mean by that? Well, I mean actually putting off making difficult decisions is never a good idea. Why? Because if something's not working, the longer you leave it, the more problems that's going to cause. And actually they can grow over time. Whether that's, like I just said, my store in a bad location. If we'd cut our losses and closed it early, we would absolutely have lost less money, I can tell you that. But it also applies about, kind of everything else in business. And it also applies really strongly to people, actually. If as we're growing our businesses, and if our business is growing well, we're able to start to employ a team of people to help us on our journey. And actually getting the right people in terms of personality fit, cultural fit is the most important thing. I mean, yes, you need people with the right skills, but of course skills can be taught and learned. If you've got the person who's not the right fit, personality-wise with you and the rest of the team, that one person actually can cause an awful lot of problems with the wider team. I've seen this 2 or 3 times on my journey over the years, working with businesses and businesses that I've run. I found it. We had a hotel a while ago, and we had an individual there for a while who really didn't agree with anything we were doing, and bad-mouthed almost everybody and the guests, to the wider team. I've seen it, I've worked in a retail business where it's sort of the same thing again. Somebody in the team who was fundamentally unhappy with her role. She wanted a different role that we weren't able to get her, even though she was doing the role we'd recruited her for. She was nothing but being very negative. Every decision was made that was shouted down, and she was abrasive with other people. And that bad energy, pervaded the entire team, and the whole team ended up unhappy. And because it's not a nice thing to have to say goodbye to somebody, make someone redundant or get rid of them. That's obviously a horrible thing to do in one sense, but you've got to think about your business and the team you have, and actually that person individually. If they are that unhappy in the role that they have in your business, they might not want to be pushed, but that role's not right for them, and it's just equally it's not right for the rest of the team. And actually, the sooner that I'm not saying you don't try and help someone work through those things first, but once you've tried those things, if you can't resolve the situation, you have to take action and say goodbye to that person for the good of them and the business and the wider team. That to me is one of the most difficult lessons I've learned, because it's in a way, it's a horrible thing to have to do, but you have to kind of look at it in that way, and that wider perspective, and take that medicine early. I'd be really interested to know if any of you have that similar experience, particularly working with team members. I'd love to find out. If you'd like to drop some comments below, that would be great. And also, if you've got any other things that tips that you've got for other entrepreneurs, things that you wish you'd known when you started out, again, put them below. We'd really love to hear from you and love to know your thoughts. Okay, right, so that's the first 2 things about working hard and not being the answer and taking your medicine early. What's number 3? Number 3, this actually was the hardest one for me personally to get to grips with, which is you can't please everybody, and you really shouldn't try. I'm somebody who likes everybody to like me, which is very difficult because in business and in life, you're never going to get everyone to like you, because we're all different, and it's not a criticism if someone doesn't like you, but if you try and please everybody, in a way you almost end up pleasing nobody. You end up with kind of, middle of the road. You take actions which aren't, the right decisions. You don't take tough decisions. You come up with perhaps products or services which are perhaps bland or because designed to appeal to everybody, but they don't really appeal to anybody. We find it even on TV, and I'm not going to single out any particular shows, but we've all come across perhaps one of my favourite examples, comedy shows which are on, at a time, say kind of 7 p.m. in the evening when, the most people are watching, across the country. And those programs, because they're trying to gain the maximum audience, they don't want to offend anybody, end up being quite bland, because actually they don't want to appeal to everybody, but they don't really appeal to anybody. And it's exactly the same in business. It all comes down to focus, and particularly thinking about customers. You can't sell to everybody, and if you try to, as I say, you end up pleasing nobody. Another example connected with this, actually, one of the other businesses I had over the years, I had a small hotel on the south coast of England, again in a town called Brighton, and it was a really nice boutique hotel. It was quite small, only had 11 bedrooms, but as it was quite premium. We're probably charging an average $250 a night for a room. And when we took over that business, we took over a business which wasn't particularly working well, and we turned it around. And when we took it over, we didn't want to rock the boat because we were learning the business, but we did want to try and get some more people through the doors. And so we basically decided to run a load of promotions with different partners to get as many people through the door as possible. But we quickly found out that not every sale is equal, not every customer is equal in terms of value to our business. And what we found was, actually, by trying to appeal to everybody, we found that people who came in who'd paid, a fraction of the normal price because we'd done a huge deal, actually were the people who were the hardest to please, because they wanted the most for their money. They wanted, in addition, free champagne in the room and free chocolates and free late checkouts and all of this. And they were the ones who were quickest to complain. You all know the value of TripAdvisor and customer reviews. If we couldn't make them happy, and we just couldn't. It was only when we took a step back and thought, well, actually, what kind of guests do we want? Where are those guests? And let's focus on those guests. And still, yes, run promotions, but run promotions which are perhaps smarter, more designed to appeal to those target customers. And it's when we started doing that, the business really turned around. Our guests were happier, our profits went up, the staff were happier because there were less complaints. Everything fell into place by focusing on a specific target customer rather than trying to please everybody. So that's my third takeaway, and it applies literally in any business. So that it's something that, particularly as a startup, you want to try and sell as many things as possible to whoever will buy them, and that kind of makes sense. But it does make sense to take a more focused approach, because that's the key to longer term growth in the business. Okay, well, that's number 3. Number 4, and this won't surprise you that I'm saying this, because as I've mentioned, I am an accountant. Every penny really does count, and you shouldn't take your eye off the expenses, what you're spending at all. Now, there's a real temptation. I've seen this in pretty much every business I've worked with over the years, and believe me, I've worked with a lot. There's a temptation that to focus on top line growth, revenue, sales, and once those sales start to come in, you kind of think, the business is growing, which is great. You kind of take a deep breath. Pressure's off. But what we find is, in a lot of businesses, what that means when I say pressure off is people then pay less attention to what's going out the other side of the business, what you're spending your money on. We find quite often that costs within the business start to creep up over time because you've taken your eye off the ball. And so actually your sales might be growing, but often we find that profit is not growing anywhere near in the same proportion. And sometimes, and we've seen this in many businesses can end up making less profit even though the sales are higher, because they're really not focusing on those at all. And this is equally important when your business grows and you have a team, people who kind of help you run the business, instilling that every penny counts culture with them. Every dollar that you spend in your business has to deliver a return. Everything is, sometimes it's more direct, like you're spending on marketing, so you expect to see yourself for it. But actually, even the cost of like an office, how big does the office space need to be for the team you need? Is that the most efficient way of spending your money? And it's really important not to lose that focus and kind of justifying every expense before you spend it. That's something that even huge multinational businesses do really well, and that's something, that focus, you need to make sure you keep that focus as your business grows. Okay, so we've covered 4 now. We've covered about working hard and not being the answer. We've covered taking your medicine early. We've covered the importance of not trying to please everybody and the importance of focusing on every penny. The final one may seem a little bit off the wall, and it's perhaps, you might think, where's this coming from? But it's to do with cash, and it's to do with taking money, right? I want you to be very careful about who you take money from in your business. I'm talking about investment, on what terms, and why you're taking the money, because I've seen this time and time again. Businesses who take money from people whose objectives are not aligned with yours as a business owner, and that can be a disaster long term. Or people who need money to pay bills right now, and they'll take a loan on whatever terms they can get because they need money today, without any thought on when they're going to be able to pay it back, because it's a problem they're just pushing down the line and they'll worry about it then. But if you don't think about these things up front, they're always going to come back and bite you in the rear. I'll give you a really personal example here. Okay, one of the businesses that I worked with a few years ago, a retail business that I was, on the senior team with. It was growing really nicely, but it wasn't quite profitable, and we needed not a huge amount of cash in the grand scheme of things. Literally to tide us over for 6 months until we planned to break even. Okay, so but because the business wasn't profitable, we were struggling to raise money. We couldn't borrow money, and we eventually found an investor who was a very wealthy individual who took a while to track down, but was prepared to put money in the business, but on quite aggressive terms. So he bought shares, we call it equity, but he wanted a seat on the board. He wanted to have a veto over certain key business decisions, and he wanted to have a certain amount of time with management every month, and to be heard with his ideas, which you might think at the start doesn't sound that unreasonable. But actually, the problem was that his objectives, specifically when he wanted to get his money back, was completely misaligned with when the other owners and the other directors wanted to make a return. He wanted his money back as quickly as possible. The other shareholders wanted to grow the business for a good 2 or 3 years and make it really big, and therefore when we sold it, we'd make the most money at that point. But because those objectives were misaligned, board meetings were a nightmare. It also didn't help that he was quite an aggressive character, and so board meetings, it was decisions were not made because he kept blocking them. The business was for many months, literally kind of hamstrung, couldn't make the right strategic decisions to grow, all because we'd taken money from someone. It wasn't his fault, but his objectives were different to ours within the business. And so it's really important to understand those. When you're taking money from somebody, what's their objective with lending you money? Is that aligned with yours? Is this something? Think to yourself: is this somebody who I can work with? Do I get on with them? Do I think they can add other value? Can they open other doors for me? All of these questions it's critical that you ask them, no matter how desperate you think you are for cash. Because if you get it wrong at the start, you might find that you solve this month's problem, you're just kicking another problem down the road, or store up a whole host of even bigger problems which you can end up having to deal with down the line. So anyway, there we are. There's just 5 things that I really wish I'd known before I started out. As I say, mistakes that I've made over the years. Hope you find those helpful. Do drop me some comments below. As I say, I'd love to know if you've got any other tips for us. We'd really love to hear from you. And also let me know if this content is kind of hitting the mark. Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Would you like to talk about other things? Let me know and we'll do another session on them. Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. We've covered a few things. So what I've done is I've put those 5 key points down in a free fact sheet which you can download below. And what I suggest is if you download that, take it away and give some thought to how you might apply some of those learnings to your own business, either one you're about to start or one that you're running, and see if there's anything that you can take away from that might make you rethink at how you're running things. And if you download that fact sheet, I'm actually going to give you another free fact sheet all about cash flow, because it's the number one topic that comes up from your clients I work with time and time again. How can I end up with more money in the bank pool? Because that's what it's all about. So what I've done is I've taken my top 10 learnings over 25 years of experience, and I've distilled those down into 10 points in one fact sheet that you can use to start making a difference to your bank balance today. So hopefully that's helpful. I say download the fact sheet, and if you've not done so yet, do subscribe so you can get more content going forward. Anyway, thanks very much for your time today. Hope that was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.